Let us pray. O God, open our eyes that we may see, our ears that we may hear, and our hearts that we may understand, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Appearances can be deceiving. I think we are all familiar with that saying. Appearances can be deceiving. One of the flaws of human nature is that we tend to judge people based on outward appearance, based on first impressions, based on externals. About a decade ago, there was a Scottish woman by the name of Susan Boyle who was a contestant on a show called Britain's Got Talent. It was sort of the UK equivalent of America's Got Talent or Canada's Got Talent. And Susan Boyle was this single, middle-aged, shall we say matronly-looking woman, not at all what you would expect on some of the glitzier shows like American Idol. And when she came on the stage to audition, people had already written her off. The crowd started to snicker. The judges were rolling their eyes. And then when she opened her mouth, it was unbelievable. She had the voice of an angel. It was incredible. The judges gave her the highest marks, and they gave her a standing ovation, and they had to admit their own prejudices. It's really a great story. It's a reminder that we tend to worship beauty and celebrity in our culture, and we tend to make judgments based on first impressions, on appearances and externals only. James Berkeley is a Christian author who talks about leadership in the church. And specifically in one of his books, he talks about pastors. And he says that pastors tend to think things appear better than they actually are. We tend to look at things through rose-colored glasses. Now, let me give you an example. If you ask any pastor what the average attendance is at his or her Sunday morning service, I can guarantee you it will be a little bit exaggerated, a little higher than it actually is. Now, it's not that we try to lie. It's just that we look at things through rose-colored glasses. Now, Berkeley has this chapter where he talks about pastors and how it's kind of like a good news, bad news scenario. And he has these funny statements that are contradictions, and they're addressed to pastors. And let me read a couple of them for you. The good news: your church's new recovery group is well attended. The bad news: your spouse is in it. The good news: people have caught the vision for church growth. The bad news: they ask why it's not happening. The good news: the new donated computers are loaded with all the latest technological advances. The bad news: this is for 2003. The good news: your youth pastor is finally getting kids to attend church. The bad news: they're attending the church down the street. The good news: when you were sick, the women's group voted to send you a get well card. The bad news: it passed 31-30. The good news: the church board accepted the job description the way you wrote it. The bad news: they formed a search committee to fill it. The good news: Mrs. Jones is wild about your sermons. The bad news: she's also wild about Jerry Springer and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The good news: 70 junior high students showed up last Thursday. The bad news: the meeting was on Wednesday. Well, I think we can all agree leadership is important in the church. But unfortunately, what passes for leadership today in our world is often based on opinion polls and surveys and political correctness. But the church needs good leaders. We need leaders who are biblically grounded and who are spirit-led. The Bible was filled with good leaders, leaders who were used by God because they understood the principles of good leadership. Samuel was one such leader. Samuel's story is a bit of an unusual one. You may remember it. His mother, Hannah, was unable to have children early in her life. And she prayed about this. And it was a source of great consternation for her. And eventually she was blessed with a son. And she was so grateful to God that she dedicated Samuel to the service of God in the temple. And Samuel grows up in the temple under the tutelage of the priest Eli. And it's in the temple as a boy that he first hears the call of God in his life. And then fast forward 20 years, it's the prophet Samuel who anoints the first king over Israel, King Saul. But Saul is disobedient. He runs afoul of God's law, and God decides to take the kingship away. And so God says to Samuel, "Go to Bethlehem and anoint one of Jesse's sons as king." Now, the only problem is he doesn't tell Samuel which son to anoint. And so he has to discern God's will and through wisdom figure out which son it's going to be. Now, God does give him one piece of advice. He says, don't look at the outward appearance. People look at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so Samuel goes off to Bethlehem, and he has all 7 of Jesse's sons parade before him, kind of like a talent show. Or maybe it was more like how we used to pick teams in gym class. You remember those days, there were 2 captains, one picked one another, and so forth, and you just prayed you weren't the last one to be picked. But it is a little bit of a talent show, and these sons parade before him, and God hasn't chosen any of them. All 7. And so Samuel is discouraged, and he sort of says as a Hail Mary to Jesse, "Well, you don't happen to have any more sons, do you?" And Jesse says, "Well, there is one more, but he's just a boy keeping the sheep out in the fields." Translation, he's not king material. He's the runt of the litter. You will not want him. But Samuel says, "Go get him. We will not rest until I see him." And when David appears before Samuel, he knows this is the one, and he anoints him as king over Israel. Well, as we continue our journey through this season of Lent, we come to a story that has some great themes for us to consider. It speaks to us about judgments based on outward appearances, and it offers insight into leadership and the qualities we should be looking for in a good leader. But most of all, I think this is a story about seeing with the eyes of God. And it contains some lessons which can encourage us today. First of all, there is a time for moving on. Verse 1 in our scripture. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him from being king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons." You know, life is full of disappointments. It's easy to become discouraged and to stop serving the Lord. If things don't go our way, we have a tendency to give up. But there comes a time when we need to accept our disappointments. We need to move on to whatever God has planned next for us. Samuel was discouraged. Think about it. He had anointed Saul as the king, and Saul was a failure and disobedient to God. And we all know that sense of loss and failure and disappointment. And I'm guessing Samuel felt a responsibility here. But there comes a time when you have to move on. And Samuel, no doubt, was grieving about his own sons. In 1 Samuel 8, verse 3, we read this: "Yet Samuel's sons did not follow his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, 'You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations.'" Probably Samuel was questioning his own judgment. And many of us know this sense of pain and disappointment, don't we? Maybe it's our children who pursue unwise paths. And maybe we feel responsible. Maybe some of us have been rejected as leaders in the past. But there comes a time, I think, when we have to move on. We have to stop grieving. We have to move on to new opportunities and challenges. And Samuel was grieving the changes in his nation. And it's the same with us. Our world is changing so fast that our comfort zones are disrupted. But God challenges us and says, get over it and move on. He says, see the potential in yourself and others and move into new areas of service. Secondly, there is hope for those who are confused and fearful about the future. God has a plan. Verse 2. Verse 2, not in chapter 8. Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears of it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, for you shall anoint for me the one whom I name for you. There is hope for those who are anxious and afraid of the future. Samuel had no idea which son would be king. And young David had no idea what the future would hold for him. He simply came and allowed Samuel to anoint him. God's will, you see, is often revealed to us in stages. It's rarely a flash of insight. It often comes in simple steps where we must take the next step in faith. Woody Allen, the actor and director, once said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your future plans. If you want to make him laugh louder, tell him how much you know. As Christians, I think we live on a need-to-know basis. We don't know every step of the future, but God does. And in due time, he will make the way plain for us. This was the lesson Samuel needed to learn as he went to Bethlehem to anoint a new king. And then thirdly, this passage reminds us that we must see others through God's eyes. Verse 6, when they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before me. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look in his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. The Lord looks on the heart. Our culture reinforces this stereotype, doesn't it? How we judge by appearance and externals. God reminds Samuel of this perspective. Things are not always as they seem. Leith Anderson, for many years, was a pastor and president of the National Association of Evangelicals in the States. And he grew up outside of New York City. When he was a kid, back in the 50s, he was a big fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And his father took him one time to his very first World Series game. But the Dodgers lost to the Yankees. In fact, the Dodgers never even got on base. And years later, he was talking with a sports fan, and he was telling him about his very first game as a kid, a World Series game. And he said, it was such a disappointment. I was a Dodgers fan, and they never even got on base. And the man said to him, you were there. You were at that game when Don Larson pitched the only perfect game in World Series history. And then it dawned on him. He had missed the entire point. We get caught up, you see, in our defeats. We miss what God is doing, and we misjudge people, and we fail to see beneath the surface. Most people, I think, do judge by outward appearance. But you know, we are not most people. As Christians, we are the people of God. God looks beyond the external to what is in the heart. We need to pray that His Spirit will help us to do the same. Someone has said that Saul looked the part, but David had the heart. One was rejected while the other was chosen. In the end, what others think really doesn't matter. What God thinks is what makes all the difference. When God looks at your heart, what does He see? Today's scripture asks some questions of us. Are you grieving over a Saul in your life? Have certain people disappointed you? People you have invested yourself in? Maybe that Saul is you. Perhaps your own desire for recognition is hurting your Christian witness and service. Or maybe you are tired of struggling with that certain habit or sin in your life. Or maybe you're still holding on to a grievance, to some offense from someone that has hurt you. God is saying to you what He has said to Saul. How long will you grieve? It is time to move on. All of us experience sorrow, loss, disappointment in our lives. Some of these losses are life-changing, and we will never be the same. But I do believe we can move forward with God's help. My prayer is that you will be able to see others as God sees them. Let's strive to see the potential in other people. Let's not give in to fear, but instead ask God's courage to venture into unknown territory. Samuel was afraid to go and anoint a new king, but he went, not alone, but in the strength of God's Spirit. I don't know what challenges you face in your work or your relationships or in your home, but like Samuel, we are called to put one foot in front of the other, to venture forth into the future, even though we cannot see the outcome. But God knows the outcome. We are in His hands. And friends, that should be enough. Let us pray. Oh God, this morning, help us to see others through your eyes. Keep us from making rash judgments and jumping to conclusions. Help us to see the potential in others and to look for good leaders. As we contemplate our future here at Kingsway, we ask for your guidance as we prepare to begin the process of finding new leadership. Help us also to move on from the past and to look into your future, O Lord. For we believe you have good things in store for us. Enable us to step out in faith, knowing that you will hold us and lead us in the right direction. We offer our church and our future to you this day, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.